Cool. Well, we'll kick things off. Governor Gordon, thank you so much for being here. It's parade day in Sheridan, Wyoming, so we're downtown in our office, the third floor of the old press building downtown Sheridan, and so we have the parade outside, and we'll be hearing it a little bit here and there, but it'll be fun. There's kind of a big heartbeat happening right now downtown.
This is a great parade. It's always fun to come see it, watch it with growing up, and then I've been in it several times too. So
yeah, well, and hopefully we'll get through this and we can catch maybe a little of the parade before it totally wraps up. So, Governor, I'm excited to chat with you because one, I've grown up here in Wyoming and attended the University of Wyoming, and there's been a number of events, whether it's the Tech Summit or the Governor's Business Forum or various other things where I've heard you speak. And something I think that has stuck out to me over the years as you've been in your role is it's very seldom that you don't tell a story, that you don't start out your conversation or your speech or whatever you're doing by telling a story. One of which I remember, I don't remember when it was, but it was talking about watering, I think, the chickens. That was one of the stories that stuck out to me, and I think your dad had an opinion about how that was done, and it's kind of interesting. So I wanted to ask, when did you sort of learn the power of storytelling?
Well, I guess growing up here, always heard stories. This was a place that was rich in sort of the lore. I remember Manville Kendrick telling me stories about this place before fences, and we had a babysitter that came into the country in a covered wagon, and we just were mesmerized by all of that. I think when I started sort of doing public presentations and giving talks and things, I never really sort of tapped into that. And at one point I was telling a story, I was actually here, I was telling a story kind of about an early morning cattle gathering, being a kid on a horse, and kind of how scary it was to be in the dark, and then when the light came up you could see people, and I was kind of relating that to what it felt like to be in government. And afterwards Dave Kinski actually came up and said, "That's the best speech you ever gave." And Dave's a friend. I don't want to give him too much credit. But,
yeah, sure. Yeah, I get it.
But it kind of struck me that it was easy to do. I didn't have to try to walk through piece by piece, and the metaphor was kind of a good one. And so from that point on, I started saying, well, what is the point I'm trying to get across? And is there something in my history that can kind of engage in this so that I can leave the message? So it's just sort of kind of came together. And it's, as I thought about it, there have been other times that I've talked about stories, and they all seem to work a little better than just the raw,
just hitting it.
Point A, point B.
Yeah, sure. So a guy that comes to mind that you might know, now that I think about kind of master storyteller, would be Dave Munsick. I don't know if you know Dave at all. That's kind of his tagline as storyteller. I mean, he sings and he plays music, but the stories are so powerful, especially from a ranching perspective.
And you think about Jim Niner, you think about these people that just were such a wonderful force about, kind of mesmerize you about, this is a magical place. I mean, Wyoming is a magical place, and the northeast corner has so much history to it that, kind of thinking about what that was and those funny moments. Curly Witzel, I don't know if you ever knew Curly. Curly was an old cowboy, worked out at Eaton's for a while, married a gal, but there's stories about him at the Sheridan rodeo that just were funny. At one point he had a bet with somebody to ride a pig down to the Mint bar. And the guy took him up on it, and he did ride it down there. But those kinds of things.
Rode a pig to the Mint bar.
I rode a pig all the way down, and you think about the people that put this country together and the character that they had, and you realize that we still live in that kind of time. And I hope we don't lose it, and being able to relate those stories to me kind of brings that back.
Sure. What What do you think are the parts of telling a story that, as you're kind of crafting your speeches and you're putting that story together, what are there specific things you're trying to keep in mind? Like, oh yeah, I do got to touch on this or touch on that in terms of the arc of that story, or?
Yeah, I think, and thanks for that. You're thinking about the things that you want to relate. That story about gathering cows early in the morning as a young kid and what your job is, kind of made sense to me when you're trying to articulate to the legislature that we have a job to do. We have to get this job done. It's going to take all of us to do, and it gets lonesome in a couple of places. So being able to find the metaphor that works there
For a particular audience.
Yeah.
Like, I want this metaphor to hit.
And,
so I can drive a
and
point.
in my second inaugural, I spent a lot of time. There was a time when my sister and I and my dad left our mountain camp, and there was a trail. We all knew it pretty well, and we could get down to the ranch pretty straightforwardly. This was August, and it started snowing, and the clouds came in, and it was really hard to see where you were going. And the point I was trying to make there was, here's Wyoming. We've got all of these things. We just come out of COVID. We had the Biden administration, big changes there. We were struggling with a bunch of stuff. Where do you find the trail? And the point I was trying to make is, this is the metaphor I sort of engaged with. And it's true, on the trail down to the ranch, if you went too far to the left or too far to the right, you'd end up rimrocked.
Yep.
And I was talking about how important it was to find the right path, and not to kind of veer off too strange. So that's a metaphor that worked. And I think, if a person finds something in their history that they can relate to, that can illustrate the point you're trying to make, that I think, Carrie, it seems to have worked. I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a combination of recognizing your audience, being clear about the point you're trying to drive home, looking back in your history and saying, what sort of personal experience and emotion and voice can I give to this story to help the audience really uptake the point, and come at it where you're not just hitting it with a hammer, but you're kind of onboarding people into a thought process by illustrating. That's great.
And it's interesting, Josh, I would recommend, if people are trying to figure out how to do a fairly straightforward talk, there's a book, and it was recommended to me by a friend years ago, called Talk Like Ted. And it's fairly short, and for somebody like me, there's even a Cliff Notes version of it. But it talks about somebody had examined a bunch of TED Talks and said, what are the most sought after? What are the ones that get viewed over and over and over again?
Yeah, become iconic.
What are the commonalities? And the commonalities are, and these are the things that kind of kept in mind as I've gone ahead in this career. A little bit of story about yourself. Tell the audience something that they probably don't know. Something interesting, not a long-winded thing, but it's something interesting that would catch them.
It's like, oh wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I learned something from this. But tell your point. And also sort of set people off at the beginning. So, because everybody kind of sits down and they wait for you to, it's really an honor to be here, great to talk. I want to tell you about it. But being able to, I was saying that at one point when Bill Gates was talking about malaria, he brought a little jar in and opened it up and shook it out and then closed the lid and said, I've just released a couple of mosquitoes in the audience here, and then he started talking about malaria and the importance of it, and the point that Talk Like Ted made was that everybody was thinking about, well, maybe there's a malaria mosquito in here, and then at the end, of course, it wasn't, but but it got the audience open to listening to it. So.
Yeah, that is awesome. As it relates to the stories you choose to tell, do you? And this is a little secret sauce question, so feel free to say, hey, this is I don't want to give that away. But when you decide the story you're going to tell, do you ever change it up? Like when you get there and you kind of see the audience, or you see some of the do you go, I'm going to pull an audible and I'm going to tell a little different story, or do you kind of always say, well, this is what I'm going with, or do you? I'm just curious if you end up kind of going, I think I'm going to tell a different story. Like that would be better for what I've kind of,
I will say that since I've gotten a bit more comfortable, and I think the more you do, in front of audiences and things, the better you get.
Yep.
And if I've gotten any better at all, it has been being able to call the audible to say, well, that story doesn't really fit today. Is there something else, or is there a flavor, or is there a thing I can emphasize that in the story that may not be core to the normal story, but it's something that happened during the course of it that,
sure.
And that the case of the second inaugural, it was simply a story about following our dad off, we were little kids, and following our dad off the mountain. I remember that tree that I was talking about was a landmark. We couldn't see it until we got right on it, but that was able to sort of dwell at that point on, well, we had a choice to make, and we knew if we did something stupid, we would end up being rimrocked, and that would be difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's good. That's great stuff. Is there a particular, payoff in building trust or bringing people together or moving ideas forward that you look back and go, man, if I wouldn't have told this story or approached it this way or whatever, that might not have happened, or we might not have made this happen. Is there any that kind of come to mind? Just curious.
I hope I've been able to communicate ideas, and I think they help in being maybe a bit more convincing. Mm-hmm. There's the principle that I've always sort of lived by, I think, is that it's sort of what Lao Tzu, who is this poet, talked about, that a good leader is someone when everything is said and done, they'll say, that person helped us, or excuse me, that person did this for us. A better person is someone who, when all is said and done, the people say, that person helped us with this. But the very best is when everything is said and done, the people say, we've done this ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so if there's a story that can resonate with people, that can get them to think about things along the same lines, to me, it's always best that the people do it themselves.
It's kind of teaching people to fish versus giving them a fish to a certain degree.
Yeah.
It's like now they're empowered. And
actually,
they feel like,
I think a bit that, but it's almost like discovering helping people discover how great it is to fish.
There you go. Okay, so that's great. It's kind of layered deeper.
Yeah,
that's great. Cool. Well, transition a little bit to like Wyoming businesses and communities. Mm-hmm. What role do you see a good story playing into helping our businesses in Wyoming and communities thrive? There's a lot of small communities trying to make an impact. They don't have all the resources everyone would always want. But I believe strongly that a powerful story can do wonders, and changing culture and all these things. So I was just curious your perspective on kind of the role of story for a community or a business in Wyoming.
Well, I think it's a way of reflecting the pride you have in your community. And if there's anything about Wyoming that really stands us apart, I think it is pride in why we're here. This is an easy country to live in. And as you say, we haven't got all the resources. Weather isn't all that forgiving at times. It can be both pretty darn hot and pretty darn cold. And,
Yes, yeah.
And, you know, I always laughed because Dad had 2 thermometers. He had one that was in the sunlight that we were supposed to look at in the winter, and one that was in the shade when we were doing haying that we were supposed to do. And I think, you know, the pride of like, well, we got through this and everything else, I think helps to build a sense of resoluteness and the reasons why you know it's good to do business in Wyoming. And then you can start talking about the advantages that we have over other places. We're more nimble, we're more accessible. You can get to you know policymakers a little bit quicker and easier. You can converse with them on a you know you're my neighbor kind of basis. And so to me, I think the storytelling reminds us of what a special place we live in, reminds us of how hardy a people we are, and allows us to be able to move forward from there.
Yeah. Well, and by bottling up all those things you just mentioned, everything you shared is really a little micro story about, you know, the connection to people, the access, the, you know, everything you said, how small we are, but how nimble we can be. That's all story. Everything you just said is story. And I want to kind of call that out because sometimes we forget that, you know, if I say, how was your vacation? Whatever you say to me is a story.
You're right.
Right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
You know, do you like your phone or not? Yes, but I don't for these reasons.
Right.
That's story.
Those are
you know,
stories.
We just are storytelling creatures.
Yeah.
That's literally, but when you don't take the time to think like, well, what story am I telling about Sheridan or Burlington or whatever, right? It's like, well, wait a second, what do we want to be talking about? Because what you speak into the air becomes, it kind of boomerangs back.
Right.
You know, it's kind of planting a crop. You know, you plant these seeds and it's going to grow.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So that's great.
And every task that we have, just to follow up on that, I think it's interesting you say that. Every task that we have is unique. You know, we may have done it 50 million times before, but this time is going to have something a little different. And if the world were just an operating manual, you know, it'd be a pretty boring place. And I think that's for me, you know, contemplating jobs to do. And I think about this because of, I guess, mornings on horseback, and you know, we would go out, and there were certain people on the ranch that just would say, do this, do that, and you wouldn't really understand why. Others would say, you know, we're going to go here, you're going to go there, we're going to try to get this stuff to go, and then you could start thinking about
connect the dots.
Yeah,
and
it's the same way I
see
learned.
Vision. You can one approach paints a vision. One you're just maybe feels arbitrary. Like, I guess I'll just go do this.
Well, it's the same thing learning how to run a cat or welding. You know, you could find the physics of doing it, but until you know somebody told you what to be feeling, you know, hardest thing for me is trying to level a road with a cat, because you know your blade goes down and starts digging, and your cat starts changing, and then you know, so to have somebody talk about kind of looking at the horizon and having a better sense of the feel of that, you know, made a difference. It made it less of a more of a skill and less of a duty, I guess you'd say.
Okay, that's great. One thing you touched on is kind of this concept that Wyoming's not for everyone, because not everyone can, in the sense that not everyone wants to be in these cold temperatures, warm weather, dirt roads, whatever, you know. Not that we wouldn't welcome everyone, but just not everyone wants to do this, what we do. And there's a few stories that I think are really fascinating. One of which is real close to home that I've been really thinking a lot about, is the fires that we had up here last October. I helped reopen Antelope Butte ski area for about 10 years.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you bet. No, it was great. It was a lot of work, and I'm glad it's done. But the GM that's up there now, you know, they hosted about 200 wildland firefighters. And he just decided to go out and interview them. Like, why do you do this? And he had some assumptions as to what answers there might be. And what he heard, the most common answer was because it's dangerous. which would be the same reason maybe you or I wouldn't do it, or someone else. That same reason is why they do it. And when you look to recruit for firefighters, you don't really want to sugarcoat what the work is. Because if you do, you'll get the wrong people, they're not committed to the mission and so forth. And I found that to just be distinctly powerful, that sometimes in our stories, we want to sugarcoat or polish or tell it in a way that maybe we think is nicer. But in reality, the truth of what it takes to do a job, or what it takes to live somewhere or accomplish something, is so much more powerful of a story. The other is when they were filming the Deadliest Catch the first year.
Oh yeah.
Halfway through, they're like, whoa, if we put this out here, what if no one's gonna? And it was the exact opposite. Everyone lined up on the docks the next year because they wanted to be a part of something that was dangerous, that was scary, and they wanted to prove themselves. And it's just interesting. Sometimes we think we need to polish it and we need to present it in this particular way. And it's like, no, you just want to make it true and honest and real.
Yeah, no, I think that is very true. The Deadliest Catch, I can see why people wanted to be, part of that, because it's you're putting yourself against the elements and all of that sort of stuff. Firefighting, I think, is very much the same. I think, my daughter worked up here on the Bighorn Forest as a firefighter. And then we've obviously fought a bunch of fires down in our country from time to time. It is thrilling work, and it's, you feel like you've accomplished something, and it's you against the elements. But I think when you talk about the danger piece of it, it's also important to have judgment about that, because it's devastating to communities when you lose firefighters.
Oh, yes.
And so I think in
all the more reason you wouldn't want someone doing it for the wrong reasons to be sold into it.
Right.
And it's like
they're
putting themselves more at risk at that point.
Yeah, and their crew. I mean, that's the other piece of it. And I think the fire season we saw last year, it's remarkable we didn't lose anybody.
No.
It really is. But there were some moments that were tough.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was just crazy to see from a Sheridan perspective, just the grasslands and the range burning up at 1 month, and then a month or two later, it was the mountains. It was just like you're just surrounded by it.
Oh,
It's just totally crazy.
Yeah.
So thankful for the people who do feel called and led to support our communities in that way, because it's not something I'm naturally inclined to do. It's just not where my skills lie. So, that's great. We've kind of started to talk about workforce sort of a little bit. You mentioned some sort of welding and different things like that. As I mentioned prior to kicking off, we sort of started to find that some of our, favorite clients, the industries around here that are just really providing jobs, they're consistent, they're stable, are these jobs that rely on skilled trades, blue collar, these skills. As you kind of, been governor a while, how have you seen, the perceptions or the design, tell me about your perspective, I guess, on the trades and how important it is to our economies and our communities and things of that nature.
Well, I think they're essential. And I'll put it a little bit maybe differently, because I think there's been a shift in education to really talk about the value of the trades and the opportunities to educate for that. Of course, over the years, we've gone from when we had shop classes to now we have some other, and home ec classes. Now we've kind of wrapped those into some other things. And we're starting to emphasize the opportunities for high school students to get internships, earn while you learn kinds of programs, apprenticeships, and so on. I think all of those are incredibly valuable. At a sort of policy level, there has been a real shift to talking about we need to, and Dave Kinski's one of these, talking about how we need to really build up our trade school potential and really start teaching more more of these skills. And I agree with that, but there's a component of that education that I don't think we're emphasizing, and I've really tried to put a point on this. And there's the story behind it, the reason for this. My roommate in college called me up one day. He's in North Carolina, and he said, I'm mentoring a young man who just came back from Afghanistan. He's from Rock Springs. He was on the Wyoming hockey team, and he worked on oil rigs, and then he went out to Afghanistan, and he came back and he said, I think I want to be an accountant, and I'm hoping to open a business. And the program they had in North Carolina had my roommate, who's a successful businessman, sort of helping to mentor this young man. And I think the point I guess I made is that a person's arc of education goes a long ways, and their ambitions, I can't tell you how many, you probably know a bunch, who said, I'm going to buy a new Dodge pickup, I'm going to put a flatbed on it, get a Lincoln welder, and I'm heading to North Dakota to be a welder because I can make all kinds of money. And then, and I can think of several of these examples where people go, well, now I have a family, and I'm not so sure that's what I really want to do, and I'll come back and find something else to do.
Yep.
So it seems to me in our discussion about trying to figure out how to emphasize more of the trades, we also need to be able to help equip people with the ability to, and I call it ambition. I want to have a skilled, ambitious workforce, because I think the ambition piece of it means that as they evolve, and we know all these jobs are changing and getting much more sophisticated, they're ready to meet that. They're not just sort of expecting, that I'm going to polish up the end of copper and, solder it together and throw it in a house. And so to me, that's the piece that we should be emphasizing more and more. And then just sort of life skills that go with that. How do I set up for my retirement? What are the things I need to do? What can I do as a junior in high school that I can say, gosh, I wish, or look what I accomplished by putting money in an IRA back when I was a junior, which isn't part of the trade school education, but it's critical to that person's future.
Yeah, that's I really love that, because you almost have, you have the college path, if you will, you have this trades path, and regardless, both groups need to be empowered to sort of say, how do I build the life that I want, regardless of whether I go down this path or that. And managing money, to your point, which is a lot of what we've kind of been talking about here, at least just here recently, is critical. Figuring out, and a lot of these skills sometimes we miss, I think, in just some formal education things, whether it's high school or college, or potentially trades, which is really, really fascinating.
Well, when we set up we growing up in KC and watching my kids go through Buffalo High School, I was a little bit of a lucky opportunity, because as a parent, you could be involved in the kids' education. So you watched and you knew these kids. I still know them. They're all amazing kids.
I think you know Chris Brzezinski.
Chris.
We just had coffee
friend.
the other day. I think I mentioned. So I think he told me to tell you hi. So
Chris is amazing. And there's an example. Phenomenal athlete. 2 state championships in football. I think a state championship, 1 or 2 in basketball. Really gifted athlete. Met Lexi, his wife, Miss Wyoming. I think a runner-up in the Miss America. Obviously, also very talented, very thoughtful, and then he gets injured, and it's a fairly. The thumb issue was a big injury, but having the wherewithal to be able to say, okay, now I'm going to move to financial planning or something. That's where I think we need to to allow for that flexibility to happen. And I get a little bit nervous when people start saying some people are built for college, some people aren't.
I agree.
Because that's limiting.
It is, yeah.
So.
No, that's really, really good. I think a lot of it comes down to, a couple things, I guess. Something that comes to mind is I believe Sheridan County is the highest percentage of self-employed people of any county in Wyoming, and by that, it's probably pretty high up there nationally, I would imagine. I haven't looked that up, but so that requires a certain level of ambition or drive to just kind of figure it out. I have a good friend, Danny is his name, and Danny Hendricks, and he's a wonderful painter, and he can build anything and fix anything. And now he's gone out on his own to build a business. And it's really interesting to watch the trepidation and maybe even fear at like, I don't want to mess this up. I'm like, just the same vigor that you have at like laying a bead and having it wrong and break it and do it again and paint this and repaint it and do that. Like, you need to take that mindset and find a way to apply that to building your business, because it's not as scary as you think. I know you don't have the degree or whatever. You don't have an accounting class. You don't have this, but like, you can learn so much by just doing, by just trying, and by having mentors around you to ask questions, And
I think that's the key, because I think about that. There was I tell this story all the time, but at a certain point, I think in every young man's life, they start looking at their dad and thinking, boy, they missed it. They don't understand me. That's just, in my case, I didn't think Dad understood ranching as well as he should, because that's where I was going to be, and everything else. There's always that tension. And I was fortunate enough with the circumstances, is in the 80s, there were a lot of changes that happened, and I was fortunate enough to get my own place and try to figure out how to pay it off. Scared to death. I mean, borrowing money, how was I going to pay it off, everything else. It was really worth the risk. But also having a mentor, and I think all of us can do this, whether it's somebody working for you or somebody you know. I think if you're of a certain, you've been somewhere, it's important to kind of help build the confidence of those that come behind. And the example I give, Raymond Plank, started Apache Corps. He was a friend, and I remember at some point he said, well, you're young enough to fail, because you can start again. And I think that fear of failure is something we all hate. Nobody wants to waste time, but you are going to learn something.
You're learning. I love that story you just told about, if we've gone ahead, what does it look like to kind of turn back and invest in the people who are on the way up? And a friend and client is a great guy, Bryce True, part of the True family, and he years ago shared this sort of poem about bridge building. It's a bridge builder poem, and it has this whole premise that, like, as a bridge builder, you've crossed the chasm, you've gone the other side, and other people that are adventurous and whatever just keep going. The bridge builder says, how do I turn back and allow others to get over this in an easier way? Right? And it's a really kind of moving poem. You can find it if you Google it. And I just think it's a strong message for the culture in Wyoming of how do we help others come along? Well, we got to be bridge builders. We cross this chasm, we've learned these things, and we come back and say, well, how do I help the next generation cross that and even go further than I've been able to? But we kind of have to depress our egos at, like, I'm going to just keep going, I'm going to help others.
Right.
And I think I see it all the time, so I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I think that's an important story for us to continue to tell.
You bet.
Especially as the generations change and we lose sort of the matriarchs of our state. You know? We got to kind of embolden our next generation to say, let's keep being bridge builders,
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think it's even more important today when there's all the temptations of AI and technology. We sort of tend to think of, gosh, everything new is awesome. Everything old is boring.
Yeah.
And you think back as to the point of my dad, there are so many things I now respect in my dad, both because of his friendships and the things that they dealt with, that you won't find in AI. You won't find somewhere else. This is, the feeling of a set of circumstances and how did they sort through that. So to me, that being able to respect the wisdom of somebody and at the same time be able to impart the wisdom without being didactic or proselytizing about it, but just the conversation and the encouragement.
And stories help in that.
Yeah.
From younger person to older person, vice versa. It's like,
you bet.
How do we tell a story that goes, I haven't thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, open people's minds. Yeah, that's great. Man, we could go a lot of different paths, and I want to make sure we keep you on track as well. As you've been governor a while now, how have you? How has the story that you've kind of told yourself about Wyoming changed? Now, that's maybe a weird question. It's a big question, but I couldn't imagine. I mean, I've not done your job, and I imagine you just get a wonderful opportunity to learn about so many things and meet so many interesting people and then gain different perspectives and so many people looking up to you and all these things. And so I'm just, curious, like, how has that story, the Wyoming story, almost morphed or, as you've done this work as governor?
Well, I think the state's different than the one I grew up in. And I worry a little bit about that because the one that you and I grew up in is a wonderful. It's almost a sense of family, from Wyoming. No matter where you were, there's some connection there. There's been a lot of in-migration. I'm not, bemoaning that. That's great, and I'm glad that people find Wyoming to be a nice home. But they don't necessarily have that same sort of sense of history. That I think was so important to Wyoming. And so as I think about it, I think of my role as trying to keep that strong sense of community, that strong sense of resilience, and not just sort of the opportunistic, well, I'm going to move here because there's low taxes, but I'm going to be part of the community. I'm going to make a bit of a difference here. I want to pay it forward, so to speak. And I think that's, I wrestle a lot with that because there's so much, as I've said, to me, there's so much that makes Wyoming such a special place, and it gives character to people here that is recognized by businesses. I've had kids that have gone to work in other companies and they always end up doing pretty well, and it's because they have a work ethic. They stop when the job's finished, not at 5. They get to work a little bit early. They enjoy it. They want to make it better. And I think those are characteristics, by and large, of people in Wyoming. And it's not just what's in it for me, because I know my neighbor might need my help. So I'm hoping in my time as governor, there's been a lot of cross currents. COVID was a mess. Wyoming did a lot better because we stood alone. It's interesting to me that we broke a lot of molds during that. Could have done better in some things, but I think we did okay. Since that time, there's been just sort of this tug and pull between the right and the left, between Biden and Trump, and between Obama before that and Trump. And so I think for Wyoming to succeed, again, it's that sort of thing about not getting too far to the left, not getting too far to the right, but finding the way that allows for our independence and our enterprise to be able to continue regardless of what is happening in politics.
That's good. That's really good. Maybe kind of final question that I have, and then if there's anything that just you'd like to talk a little bit more about before we wrap up here, it's kind of along the same lines. But as you shared kind of your perspective on where Wyoming's been versus where it maybe is now and where we're headed. What would be like a piece of advice that you might give a young person that either is growing up here and might continue to live here, or maybe someone even that's outside the state that might find themselves here? What piece of wisdom or would you kind of impart, or what would you want to tell them?
Well, I think there'd be a few. Yeah, the reason I love Wyoming is because I guess I grew up knowing that you could make a difference if you just got involved. That you could, that if you tried, the whole thing about you might fail, but you're going to learn and you can try again. And so persistence, I think that's sort of built into our character from the weather and everything else that we get. But I think it is, how important it is to be engaged, how important it is to try. And at the end, it's just a glorious place to live. So you can find meaning and you can find value in what you've done.
That's great. I dig that. That's awesome. Well, is there anything else we should talk about before we wrap?
No, this is your interview.
Yeah.
I'm loving it. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for being here and just taking the time. I've really enjoyed hearing you speak at all the different things across the state in your time as governor, and to see quite frankly, the progression in your public speaking just throughout that time. It's like the confidence, the stories, it's really neat to see that process, because I couldn't imagine, I couldn't imagine doing the job and the work that it takes to do. And so I appreciate your service and your willingness to put yourself in the public in that way, because it's a scary thing. So,
well, thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.